welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I will be your host for Monday or Wednesday or Thursday or Saturday. It doesn't matter. It depends when you're listening, because after all, it's your podcast. Joining me today is a gentleman who is not in the forest, he's not in the valleys, he's not in the sea, but you might find him on a mountaintop. It's Matt Quock from Mountaintop Games, and he's here to talk about the primary, because this is We're Not Wizards and this is a quick start on the Kickstart. So, hello Matt.
Hello, thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I'm good. Yeah, very good. Busy. I'm about a 9.8 just at the moment. Things,
oh my gosh.
I'm kind of like, this is, things are good. I feel. Do you know what I feel like? I'm like the end of the Rocky montage when he gets to the steps, and he's just got his arms in the air, like stretching up. How you doing though?
I'm good. I was probably right around that 9.8 the other day when the Kickstarter launched, but things are calming down now for me.
Because you've got your game out at the moment, called the Primary, which I'm gonna guess is not a dungeon game. It's not a car racing game. I'm guessing it's potentially about. Is it about? It's not about schools. It's about elections, isn't it?
You nailed it. There you go. Right on the head. It's election themed, but the gameplay is not at all political.
Oh right, okay. Well, let's we'll definitely to find out why that is the case then, sir. But what we need to do beforehand is we need to say hello to everybody who's listening for the first time. So hello everybody who's listening for the first time. The reason that we do this is because there's quite simply not enough podcasts out there about board games.
Hello everyone.
Hello everybody who's looking for a board game podcast. You don't have to look anymore. Definitely don't have to go to Apple Podcasts and look for board games. They're just right here. There's us. There's the other Scottish people. There's the Unlucky Frog Gaming. There's also the incredibly large First Player Token as well, but they don't do board games as much, so we kind of mention them now and again, but definitely Unlucky Frog Gaming. And the other reason that we do this is because about last year, middle of last year, me and Matt struck up a conversation, and the conversation went, "Hi Matt, hey Richard, I listened to your show. Yeah, are you getting a game together? Yeah, I am. When are you getting your game together? It's going to be 2018. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we talk in 2018? Now, all of a sudden, 2018 went from being well over there to actually being here in the now. And so what we want to do is we want to have a little chat with Matt, and we're going to find out a little bit about his history with the hobby, and then we're going to find out a lot about what he's doing with this primary thing that he's talking about. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into the hobby first of all?
Yeah. I'm actually relatively new to the hobby. I live in Madison, Wisconsin right now, and I went to school here and left to go work in Michigan, and then just recently, about two and a half years ago, came back. And that's really when I started getting into the hobby. I kind of reconnected with some old roommates who were still in the area, and they slowly introduced me to the hobby, got me playing some cooler games. We eventually got a weekly game group together, and I just fell in love. So childhood, always played Monopoly and Risk and those classics, but it's only been the last couple of years that I've really gotten into playing some of these cooler games, and then even more recently than that, trying my hand at designing them.
What was the first game that you got introduced to?
Oh wow, probably Ticket to Ride. That's probably my gateway game.
Did they kind of lay it out in front of you and said, "Matt, you seen a board game before?" Yeah, of course I've seen a board game before. And then they kind of opened up the box slowly. It did the very slight board game opening box kind of fart. And they went, "Look, Matt, trains, Matt, little plastic trains. But where do they go? They go in here, they go on the board. But there's no dice. There's no randomness. Well, there kind of is. But and then you were doing that was you where you're off. Did you step into the world of Pandemic as well?
We did. I think, yeah, right when I was starting to get into it, that was like obviously one of the huge games on the market, and everyone's raving about Pandemic. So that was one of my first acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
I think also at the time, Dead of Winter was a big hit, so that was another one that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And it was actually pretty heavy for just starting out, but I really love that game.
I like the theme of it, and I also like how it takes some really complicated kind of mechanics and kind of makes it kind of really, really easy, and also makes it very, very kind of social.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember playing that and just going, whoa, this is kind of, this is very, very deep for what appears to be a game with like standees. It's kind of like,
right.
Where's the minis? It can only be a serious game if it's got minis. But so you launched onto that. I mean, have you got a reasonable size game collection now?
I do. I haven't counted recently, but I've got a small bookshelf, and it's spilling onto a bigger bookshelf, and then there's a pile of games that have been yet to play. So I'm always chipping away at those and always adding more.
What's your most recent kind of acquisition kind of been then?
So today I bought I was at the local game store, and they just have actually a used section that's way too tempting.
I was just passing by the local game store. Is that the local game store that's 25 kilometers away from me? Yeah, that one. I just happened to end up in my car. But you're in the used section, sorry, you were saying.
Yeah, that's my favorite place to look. I'm a sucker for a good deal. So I found a copy of Elysium, which has been on my want to play list for a while now. So I'm excited to check it out and play it hopefully sometime soon.
I mean, with being kind of new to the hobby, and you saying you're looking at the used stuff, is the price side of things. Do you look at kind of like what they're charging for cardboard and think it's kind of reasonable, or you think it's quite a lot of money they're asking for some of these things that kind of brand new?
Yeah, I've definitely struggled a little bit, dropping more than $50 for a game. Especially I don't my regular game group from a while back, my old college buddies, kind of dissolved recently. A few people moved away, so it's harder and harder for me to find people to play with. So as I have less chances to play, it's harder to justify the new games.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But then you get back into kind of like making sure you're playing kind of all of the games that you have, which I think is I don't know, it's kind of like there seems to be, and we talk about this all the time, is that people are getting kind of games and games and games and games, and then they have kind of like massive lists of games that they'd like to play, and then a lot of games that they have, if they're selling them on, it's usually kind of one previous owner just being, never punched kind of
right
kind of thing, just never been played before kind of thing, and then kind of it's already kind of up for sale, and it's like is brand new and shrink, has only been on the shelf, and it's got like a layer of dust about 1.5 inches thick where it's kind of been
exactly
kind of there. But have you always been quite creative then? I mean, in your younger days, were you always quite a creative person and inventive in terms of that side of things?
Yeah, I would say so. Maybe not in all the traditional ways, but I'm an engineer by study or by skill. I don't know. But I've dabbled in music. I like to play the drums. I'm not the most artistic, but I used to really enjoy drawing. I would say I'm somewhat on the creative spectrum of people.
And how did you get from playing games then into thinking, well, actually, I'm going to put a game together?
I don't know if there was a specific turning point, but I think I just fell in love with board games, and then kind of like you said, just being a somewhat creative person, figured, I could do this. This seems easy. Little did I know it's quite the opposite. But yeah, I just figured I could try, and I made a few designs, most of which were pretty terrible, and then kind of stumbled across my latest one in the primary.
What do you mean stumbled across it? Was it just a kind of a passing thought that you went, oh, actually I can do something with this?
Yeah, I think the past election cycle here in the U.S., I really got a little bit more involved in the news and following everything that was going on politically. And I think it was somewhat in my subconscious when I was following the primary elections, but I really found that to be interesting, and it kind of dawned on me that, hey, the fact that in the U.S. you have these elections where different states are voting at different points in time over a span of, I don't even know, maybe a couple weeks, as opposed to the general election where you just have, the 1, 2, or 3 candidates and everyone votes on the same day. And that's been done in games before, but the primary election is a little bit different, and I don't think it's really been done before, at least nothing that I was able to find when I was kind of doing my research.
Okay. For people on the British side of the pond, Mr. Quock, what's the primary all about?
Yeah, so the premise of the game is that it follows the U.S. presidential primary election process. So what that is when the two main political parties are trying to determine who their final nominee or candidate for president of the United States will become.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a long, drawn-out process. It's in the media for years on end. But when it actually comes down to the votes, every state has a vote at a different point in time. And I don't even know the specifics of the timing, but it takes place over probably weeks. So Iowa typically votes first, and then you kind of progress randomly throughout these states, and they all have slightly different ways that they vote or do a caucus and assign these delegates. And at the end, whichever candidate from a field of 10, 20 candidates who are running to become president, throughout this presidential primary election process, you'll finally narrow down to one person who's going to represent your party. And I kind of wanted to take that idea and abstract it a tiny bit and bring it into a board game.
I mean, I guess one of the questions that will come up is, but when the election was on, there was a lot of kind of card games and I guess cash-ins that came out at the time, and yet you've waited much longer than that to bring out kind of your game. Was that because you wanted to kind of release it away from the kind of the political kind of atmosphere at that time? That you wanted people to concentrate on the game as opposed to concentrating on what was happening at the time?
I think it wasn't entirely intentional. I'm not the most patient person. So the idea kind of came from, and it was inspired by the election. So I started working on it about a year ago. And, once I kind of learned about the whole Kickstarter industry and the board game industry within it, just fell in love with the idea, got put right on my bucket list. I want to do that. It seems like a really cool thing. Mm-hmm. So the design and the development progressed pretty quickly, and I just felt like, this is just something I want to do, and, I don't really want to wait. And the timing just kind of fell as it did. I think it kind of worked out in the end. It'll, if successful, it'll launch and get delivered to some backers right around the time that we'll have midterm elections here. So every 2 years there's elections in November where some of the smaller votes are at stake for senators and other representatives and local government officials. So it kind of times well with that. It kind of times all right with holidays. But I didn't really specifically wait or try to time it. Maybe I could have waited until the next presidential election and it could have gotten some more publicity or something like that. But I just didn't have the patience for it.
Yeah, but would you have not felt then you would have had to make it about the kind of the candidates at the time? Because I'm looking at the Kickstarter campaign. While you seem to have drawn on to kind of different things that could happen to the candidates, positive positive adverts, kind of campaigns, kind of negative stuff. You don't seem to have kind of gone maybe for the stereotypical, I guess, the candidates that people would maybe expect to see. Was that kind of like a conscious decision to kind of make it a political game, but not make it necessarily about the politics of the time, because they were likely to potentially change or alter very, very quickly?
Yeah, definitely. That was something that I consciously wanted to do for a couple of reasons. I think one, politics are pretty divisive, or they can be kind of a love-hate thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I know the theme itself might scare some people away, but I didn't want it to be so much Republican versus Democrat or conservative versus liberal. I wanted to keep it pretty neutral so that you could play with somebody who has different political ideologies than you, still have a good time. You don't have to debate anybody. You don't have to negotiate. There's not really any political nastiness in the gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, I think part of that is because I don't really enjoy that when I'm playing games.
Yeah.
So that's just a natural product of kind of my tastes and my preference.
Okay.
But I also didn't want to scare people away or attach it too much to, okay, this candidate's going to be Donald Trump, and this candidate's going to be Hillary Clinton, and this one's going to be Bernie Sanders. I kind of wanted to just make it a little bit more neutral, a little bit more accessible to anyone. Even if you're not familiar with U.S. politics, you could still kind of get into it and have a good.
So, how do you play it on a round by round basis? I mean, you've got the map. It looks like we've got some meeples here. We've got you've got like clear cubes as well that look delightfully like little sweets. Look delicious. You got round tokens. You've got the first player token. So, I mean, how do you actually play the game? What's the mechanics behind it?
Sure. So the intent of the game is that you want to become your party's nominee for president, and you're going to move around the country. You're trying to gain influence in these regions that are voting at different points in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So there's 11 rounds to the game, and what you're doing is you're going to travel around the country. All the states are grouped into regions. So regions each vote during different rounds of the game. Some rounds there might be 2 regions voting, or there might be 3 regions voting, or there's even some rounds where there's going to be no votes, and you can kind of just take a break and plan and strategize. So it's a little bit of area control, and it's also some action programming. So how you make most of your moves and your actions throughout the game is every player has a small hand or deck of cards, and they're all identical, and there's a few different actions you can take where you're going to choose 4 cards from your hand, and you're going to place them face down in order that you want them to be executed. And you go around the table one at a time, and you're going to flip over your first card and execute its action. So first player does it, second player, third player, fourth player, all the way around until everyone's played all 4 of their actions. So you'll kind of have to plan and strategize for your round ahead of time, and you're trying to gauge what your opponents are going to do. You're going to try to predict what their strategy might be. And even though you've programmed your 4 actions, the cards allow some flexibility that you can react to what your opponents have done.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have a card, for instance, that's a plane, and your original plan was to fly into New York and hold a bunch of rallies and whip up the voters and get them excited for you for the next vote, but somebody moves there first. So when it's your turn, you flip over your plane and you say, never mind, I'm going to change my plans. I'm going to go back home to Chicago, and I'm going to do all my actions there instead. So that's the meat of the game, is moving around, trying to gain influence in these regions that vote at different points in time, and you kind of have to plan out your cards. And there's some tension in a few of them in the way that you gain your influence before you can spend it in a region. You can kind of go a slow and steady route by just holding these fundraisers, a very conservative way to gain your influence. Or you can also try and appeal to the super PAC, which is sort of this betting, push your luck. You're kind of guessing who's going to play the most of these cards, and whoever does gets a lot more influence. So it's a little bit more efficient, but also riskier at the same time.
Okay. Um, the bot.
Yeah.
What is this bot thing? The Electobot 9000. What is that all about?
Yeah, so there's a solo mode that I designed for the game. And the premise is that you're playing against an incumbent robot candidate.
All right.
And he's very well liked by the people, and he starts with a bunch of influence out there in the map. And you have to go up against him and chip away at his lead and try to become nominee for your party. The game plays pretty much the same way as the standard multiplayer version, but every round you're going to draw a bot card, and he's going to move around the map. Every card is a little bit different, so there's various criteria that reacts to the state of the board and the state of the game to determine where he moves and how much influence he spends and trying to block you from taking certain actions. So it's just a way that you can play it by yourself if you're ever inclined.
Yeah, I mean, was that like a consideration? Because for obviously what you've said kind of earlier on is that kind of like the game group that you were involved in has kind of like gone its own separate way. But is solo gaming, has that always been something that's kind of interested you? That's always you've been interested in doing, and is that why you kind of brought it into the game?
Yeah, I mean, I originally didn't have a lot of exposure to solo board gaming. And, as I got more and more into the hobby and designing games, I started listening to a bunch of podcasts and reading a bunch of material. And I kept hearing, like, okay, various board games have designed these solo modes. And they would bring somebody on who talk about their experience. Morton, who's done stuff for Stonemeyer Games and Viticulture. I heard him talk about his process and his system, and it just seemed like a really interesting challenge as a designer, and also something that seemed pretty relevant. I know a lot of people in the industry and gamers just really look for something that offers something for the solo player. So as I learned about it, I started to play some more myself and found that they can be pretty fun, if they're done right. So I think that's kind of how I decided, I should probably at least try to do it, and I feel like it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I think solo play is becoming it's becoming a bigger thing. I think it's becoming a bigger thing, especially for kind of Kickstarter things. I think it's one of these things that I see games that are kind of like minimum of 3 players, and that's kind of like I don't know if that kind of makes me want to play it. But something that brings kind of like in a solo variant, it's like, well, actually, that's a good thing because it allows me to potentially kind of learn the game and learn the rules.
Right,
with
for sure.
Without having to almost fake it. I mean, there's the argument that any 2-player game can be a solo game because you're just playing, you're just playing both sides of the table basically. But I guess, as I say, I've seen it kind of more and more, kind of here's the solo variant, or when are you going to be doing the solo variant? I don't know if that is because we are in this lovely, warm, fuzzy place where games are kind of tripping off the river of ideas like a huge waterfall. But what it means is that you've got, below it, you've essentially got a huge, massive pile of games. And I think it adds value to somebody who maybe has pledged into a Kickstarter, that they've then got the ability to go ahead and play that game and experience it, because I think one of the things I kind of spoke about recently was the ability for somebody to be able to go in and play your game relatively quickly and get quite comfortable with that game, because I think that, and this is just maybe me, that if I have a game in my collection, the chances of it getting played multiple times, unless it's maybe a card game that I'm trying to learn, kind of drop the more games that I kind of get. So what I want more and more from a game is the ability for me to basically set up a game and get into it very, very quickly, or be able to learn the rules very, very quickly. So a solo variant to me allows me to learn the basic mechanics from my side of the table, so I can then teach other people how to play it as well. But that's just me. Um, in terms of, because this is the first, first of all, graphically and in terms of presentation and stuff like that, the game looks, the game looks really, really good. Did you have,
Thank you.
Did you have to, one of the things when you talk about kind of like Kickstarter is the amount of kind of time and resources that you have to put into, I guess, kind of preparing the campaign. Was that what you had to do in terms of this? Do you end up kind of like investing quite a bit in making sure that the campaign and the games look right? Did you put together kind of like review copies and stuff like that?
Yeah. I'm not a veteran of the Kickstarter industry, but it seems even from my initial impressions of what I thought Kickstarter was, it seems like board games have definitely transitioned into something where people want to see, a pretty much final and polished product on the page, or they won't even, consider it.
Mm-hmm.
So big shout out to OK Art Studio. It's a couple from Argentina who've done a great job with the artwork. But like you mentioned, you have to invest ahead of time and really make sure your art looks great. And I think they've done an awesome job.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of time and money going into that, and, providing art direction and making sure that it looks good for the campaign and also just all the components. But like you said, putting together review copies, sending them out. It's such a big process, compared to what it might seem like. And I tried to do research ahead of time. I tried to read all the blogs, but until you're actually in the thick of it, you don't quite get a full appreciation for how much work is involved.
Because you're not just a designer, you're not just the guy that's commissioning the art. You have to be the kind of logistics master, don't you? You have to learn about social media and kind of marketing and negotiation with people who are potentially going to review the game and kind of everything like that. Have you had to take time away from your job, basically? Did you put aside kind of like vacation time during the kind of the Kickstarter campaign?
Yeah, it's definitely taken up a ton of my free time. Not even the Kickstarter, but just the whole design and development process.
Mm-hmm.
But for the Kickstarter specifically, I took the first day, the launch day, I took it off from work. I had read that it's highly suggested, and I would agree. It's just a crazy, crazy day, and I had this whole Excel document listing what I needed to do at different points in the day, and it was a whirlwind, but thankfully it slowed down a little bit here for me. But yeah, it's definitely so many different hats you have to wear when you're preparing a Kickstarter and during the campaign, just all the different aspects of bringing a board game to the market that I never even thought of at first.
It's doing quite well. You've got you're halfway there in terms of your funding, and you've still got a good amount of time to go before the campaign kind of finishes. For people that are, it's like at this moment you've got round about 26 days left. For people who are going to look over the campaign and consider kind of jumping in, what would you say is the reason that they should consider? What would you be your elevator pitch, Matt?
I'm very happy with where it's at right now. I've talked to some friends in the area. There's actually quite a few board game designers in the Madison area, and they've been super helpful. Some of them have their own custom projections for Kickstarters, so they keep me grounded quite a bit, and they say, okay, Matt, it looks like you're gonna maybe just squeak by. So it's still quite a nerve-wracking process, but for anyone listening or thinking about backing it, don't be scared off by the theme. I know political games and politics can be divisive or polarizing, but I think the gameplay itself, independent of the theme, is pretty good. And I have some reviews on the page that hopefully feel the same way. So check those out. And, if you're waffling about trying to back it now or later, We do have some stretch goals going on that are independent of funding. So if we're meeting certain achievements on social media and things like that, we're unlocking stretch goals that you can vote on. Being a election themed game, I decided to bring in some democratic processes into the Kickstarter.
As long as they're not getting counted on a computer.
So yeah, we had one stretch goal unlock, and then I had all the backers who were, into the project at that moment. They got to vote and decide which stretch goal they wanted to unlock first. So if you back early or back now, you can have your voice heard a little bit more and bring some input into the design of the game. So I think that's just a cool way to be involved and help kind of shape what the game's going to look like in the end.
And how much is it to get involved in this party?
So it's just $1 to back the game if you want to show your support. If you want a copy of the game, it's $35, and then depending where you live, there's a subsidized shipping fee. The US is $8. If you're in the EU or UK, it's $16.
Mm-hmm.
And you can back up to 3 games and just pay one flat shipping fee. So if you back and pledge for a couple more games, you'll get a better deal on your shipping.
Cool. Okay. And where do you exist on the internet webs?
I try to be in as many places as possible. I have a website. It's mountaintop.games.
Okay.
I have an email. Obviously, it's probably easier to find it on the website, but it's mtntop@mountaintop.games.
Okay.
I'm on social media. You can search Mountaintop Games, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Pretty much anywhere people exist on the internet, I try to be there just to be easy to reach.
Cool. Well, what we'll do is we will put all those links in the show notes that we've got notes to show.
Awesome. Thank you.
If you want to keep an eye on what we're up to.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, if you want to keep an eye on what we're up to, then just go to the Googles and search for We're Not Wizards, and you'll find us on Twitter, you'll find us on Facebook, you'll find us on Instagram, you'll find us on YouTube, you'll find us on pretty much everywhere. You'll find us on all these podcast places as well now. So you've got like Stitcher and Spreaker and Acast and Apple Podcasts, and we're on Spotify. I've no idea how, but if you do want to support the show, then please go into Apple Podcasts. And as I say, if you like what you've listened to, drop us a subscription or drop us a review. If you're going to drop us a review, then don't give us a 10 because it makes us big-headed. But don't give us a 1 because I'm an ugly crier. But give us a 5 because it's in the middle and it's average, and we're just a little bit average. But the person who's not been average tonight is the rather wonderful, the rather magnificent, your primary candidate. It's Mr. Matt Quock. Thank you for coming on, Matt.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Best of luck with it. Best of luck with the campaign. I hope it all goes swimmingly well. You sound like you've got plenty of time to going on. There's only 2 more things to do. First thing is to remember that we are many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Matt?
No, we are not wizards.
Just a little bit of politics, that's all. Nothing more. Just a little bit of politics. And the next thing is to say goodbye. So it's a goodbye from Matt. Say goodbye, Matt.
Goodbye.
And it's a goodbye from me. Remember, stay safe, roll 6s, and don't be tertiary, don't be secondary. Consider being the primary. But until the next time, goodbye.